Hi everybody! Today I wanted to talk to you about something that I know a lot of people find confusing. I know I definitely found it confusing, or maybe not confusing, but didn't really understand the why. And what I'm talking about is what on earth is the difference between baking soda and baking powder. So they're both leavening agents, but they are pretty different and they do not work necessarily the same way, and it's not a one-to-one substitution either, which a lot of people don't realize, okay? Baking soda, it's a base. It's sodium bicarbonate, while baking powder is actually baking soda, sodium bicarbonate, plus an acid, okay? I mean, if we think back to elementary school or those fun National Geographic experiments that you could do with the volcano, the reason why that works is because baking soda needs an acid like vinegar to cause that leavening effect. If we're using baking soda as a leavening agent in our recipe, it will only work, for the most part, it will only work if there is an acidic ingredient in your recipe to activate it. Once it's activated, it creates all these little bubbles of carbon dioxide that get trapped in our baked good. What are some acidic ingredients? Well, you've probably seen baking soda in recipes that have buttermilk, yogurt, vinegar, obviously, cocoa powder, one that hasn't been neutralized, so a natural cocoa powder. What else? Citrus, lemon juice, orange juice, even applesauce can be acidic. If you have a recipe that has an acidic ingredient, more likely than not, you're probably seeing baking soda. That's going to be the leavening agent that is in your recipe. Baking powder then, I told you, already has baking soda in it and the acid already in it. And a lot of times it has a cornstarch in it too to protect those two from activating in the container. So when are you gonna see baking powder in a recipe? You're gonna see it in a recipe where we don't have an acid in it. When you don't have an acid in your recipe, all you need to do is add the liquid. It's gonna combine these two ingredients together and create your bubbles. Another thing about baking powder is, I feel like the majority of them now, you'll see on that label, it says double acting. What the heck does that mean? There are two leavening events in a double acting baking powder. When you add that liquid, that first leavening event occurs and you're gonna get that first little creation of bubbles in your recipe. And that second leavening event is actually gonna occur with heat. So now you put it in the oven, or now you put it on the skillet, or whatever you do for pancakes, you put it on the griddle, and you're gonna get some more creation of bubbles. So you get bubbles created twice, leavening that happens twice. That is double acting. Now, this was the part that I always found confusing, okay? So why on earth would a recipe call for both? I would question, well then why do we need baking soda at all? If baking powder can do the job of both, then let's just use baking powder. Sometimes you do need both, okay? There's a few reasons, but number one, both create a different texture. You can get that chewy texture, like a nice chewy chocolate chip cookie. You can get a nice chewy texture in your cookies with baking soda. That's easier to do with baking soda. I feel like you get a cakier texture with baking powder. There are times when you want something to have like a browned look, so baking soda affects color, okay? If you want no color, you're gonna have more luck using baking powder because the baking soda will actually cause your item to brown a little bit more. You might need both when you don't have enough baking soda in a recipe to create that leavening effect, okay? That reaction is gonna stop once your item is neutralized. So once your acid reacts with your amount of baking soda, what if that's not enough rise for your item? That's when the baking powder comes in. Now we might need to add a teaspoon of the baking powder on top of that to make sure that our item rises to however high or however many bubbles we need it. You may also want to add both when you don't want to fully neutralize your acid because maybe you want to taste it. Maybe you want that little tang from the vinegar, your buttermilk, but you aren't necessarily going to get enough rise by not fully adding enough baking soda to neutralize that acid, if that makes sense, because we don't want to neutralize in that case. We want to taste a little bit of that. And so again, you're gonna wanna add some baking powder into that. Let's talk substitutions. In my opinion, just don't do it. Guys, don't do it, okay? Why do we gotta make things complicated? If you're going to do it, it's not a one-to-one substitution, okay? So if you're going to, if you have to, maybe you only have baking soda. In my opinion, what I would do is I would convert this baking soda into baking powder, and now it's a one-to-one substitution. That's the easiest way to do it. So how do you do that? You're gonna take 1 teaspoon of your baking soda and add a 1/4 teaspoon of cream of tartar. Hopefully that's what you have around. And now you've basically just created baking powder, and now you can use it as a one-to-one substitution, okay? So if it calls for 1 teaspoon of this baking powder, you're gonna add 1 teaspoon of baking soda plus a 1/4 teaspoon of cream of tartar, and we'll call it a day. But Here's the thing, baking soda, lots more bubbles, right, when we have that volcanic eruption. And so what you're looking at here is something that's about 3 to 4 times stronger than baking powder, and that's why it's not a one-to-one substitution, okay? And also when we need that double act, right, if you're using baking soda, you're not getting that double act from the baking soda. And you wanna be careful, because you could say, well, if my recipe calls for 1 teaspoon of baking soda, then shouldn't I just be able to add 4 teaspoons of baking powder and then it should be fine? Well, you can. However, that will affect your texture. It's gonna change your texture. And what it's also going to do is it might leave a taste that you're not super happy about, okay? Because these do, in excess amounts, leave a little bit of an aftertaste, okay? If you've ever tasted something that's a little bitter, it might be too much baking powder. If you've tasted a metallic or a soapy taste, what's happened is you have probably more baking soda in your recipe than was neutralized by your acid, which means you have activated baking soda in your recipe, and at that point you're probably gonna have a metallic or a soapy taste, okay? So just don't overcomplicate it. Stick to your recipes. Hopefully they were written correctly and the person that wrote them understood the difference between baking powder and baking soda. Last but not least, everybody, what you want to make sure is that your leavening agents, whatever you're gonna use, baking soda or baking powder, is still fresh, right? If it's not fresh, what does that mean? It means that you use it and you're not gonna get a full rise, okay? You're gonna wanna make sure that they're still gonna leaven your item, your baked good, right? Especially with the prices out there, you guys, we don't wanna waste anything, okay? So we need to make sure that if we're gonna put some baking soda in a recipe that has eggs, has butter, has chocolate, all those expensive ingredients, we wanna make sure we're getting the product that we want out of it. So how do you test these? With basic ingredients that we already have in our pantry. So what you would do is take 1/4 cup of vinegar, and then go ahead and grab some baking soda, and you're gonna place it into your vinegar, and you will see a pretty significant amount of bubbles being created. You're gonna get a nice strong reaction here, and that's gonna tell you that your baking soda is fresh. Now, what do we have over here? Well, we already learned that baking powder, it has the acid that that base needs to react already in it. And so in this scenario, we just need plain old water to test if it's fresh, okay? Again, I'll take about 1/4 cup of water, maybe 1 teaspoon here of baking powder, and I'll mix these together, and you should get a nice creation of little bubbles. Now, much less of a reaction here. Definitely not gonna be as violent as this reaction here. Oh, here we go. But a nice little creation. I can actually hear it. It sounds like it's sizzling, and so baking powder is good to go as well. You hear those little crackle pops? Nice and fresh. Okay, everybody, I hope I didn't confuse you more. I really hope I didn't. Good luck to you in your baking. Happy baking, and cheers. I'm not gonna drink this. This is vinegar. Okay, bye.